But especially, you'll need a Bible open in front of you. So it'll be from Isaiah chapter 7, and it's a really, really vital study. It is a passage of Scriptures that has given people more trouble than perhaps any passage of Scriptures in the Bible. And I want to leave enough time in the latter half of the class to talk about the problem that there is there, and because there is a solution to the problem. But when I present the problem, you may think, wow, how on earth do you reconcile all of this thing that is in there? So just so you'll be aware of it. If I talk about the book of Isaiah, we're talking about the time of the divided kingdom. I'm not going to go back and rehearse all of that. But when Solomon died, northern kingdom, southern kingdom. Northern kingdom, massively huge. 80 or 90% of the Jews fell away from following the house of David down in the southern kingdom, because they did not want Solomon's son to rule over them. And so there was a rebellion. There was not literally a civil war, but there was almost a civil war that was fought. Just like we had a civil war here in America, that nation was divided. 10 tribes in the north and 2 tribes down in the south. And the northern kingdom has the name of Israel. The southern kingdom has the name of Judah. Now, for years, I had trouble remembering which was in the north and which was in the south. You want me to tell you how, if you're a slow learner, how to remember which one was in the north? Israel starts with an I. I have eyes right here. South of my eyes is my jaw. That starts with a J. So Israel is in the north and Judah is in the south. And I love my way of remembering better than your ways of never being able to remember it. I don't know if that helps you or not. You know, I'm just not smart enough to remember everything. But if I put it in there crooked, it's always in there. If I get your name wrong, I'm sorry, I'll call you that by the wrong name the rest of your life. But this is important, because tonight we're going to be talking about that kingdom of Israel that was just north. When they came to the promised land, the northern tribes were called Israel. Now then, north of the northern tribes, I wish we had a map slide here tonight, because I had one, is where Syria is. Now, you've got to understand that property is really, really important. And so, if, you know, Israel and Judah were in a land that flowed with milk and honey. Man, if you want to get something special, all you got to do is go down to that land that flows with milk and honey, that God has blessed and blessed more than any nation on this earth, and take possession of it. And so Syria, up here in the north, was always a thorn in the side to those tribes in the northern kingdom. Down in the southern kingdom, you got the Philistines. They're right along the coast there. Well, you've got the Moabites, you've got the Edomites, you've got the Egyptians coming up that way. But the northern kingdom had a massive problem with Syria that was right above there. Now, north and east of Syria, due east of Syria, north and east of that northern kingdom, is another nation called Assyria, A-S-S-Y-R-I. And if you've got maps, in the back of your Bible, you may be able to find a map that shows how the land was divided among the tribes and everything, and that way you'll be able to see what I'm talking about the 10 northern tribes and the 2 southern tribes. And that always helps. I love having a Bible map in front of me when I'm looking at Bible geography, trying to figure all of this out. I've got a picture. Here's the southern kingdom, Judah. Here's the northern kingdom, Israel. North of Israel is Syria. Capital of Syria is Damascus. And in our modern world, that's still over there, where the Jews are over there in that land. Damascus is still up there, and Syria and the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights divide the northern part of the land that the Jews have away from the Syrians. And way over in that which now is Iraq is where Assyria was. And tonight, in this study, we're going to be talking about Assyria Syria, and Israel. So it's important to get that. Let me go through it one more time. Whenever Solomon died, that nation that had been one nation, one of the most powerful nations on earth, has unbelievable trouble. And so you have, let's do it this way, you have that southern kingdom, smaller than Palm Beach County. Right above it, you've got several hundred miles of that northern kingdom, at least 200 miles of that, nearly 200 miles of that northern kingdom. And so you've got the massive part of the Jews. By the way, they never were faithful to God. The northern kingdom never was faithful to God. North of the northern kingdom is this Gentile nation called Syria. And they're constantly fighting against the Jews and taking away Solomon's kingdom away from the northern kingdom. In fact, when they first divided, this northern kingdom reached all the way over to Iraq, over to the river Euphrates. That's how big Solomon's kingdom was. But when Solomon dies, that's all you have. You've got Judah, you've got Israel, you've got Syria. And then you've got Assyria. Now let's get to Isaiah chapter 7. In Isaiah chapter 7, a situation has developed. Look in verse 1. It came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah. You got that? Who are we talking about? Not this king up here, but this king right here, king of Judah. And it's got his lineage there. There's his father and his grandfather, and I don't know if he get to his great-grandfather in this or not. And it says that Rezin, R-E-Z-I-N, who on earth is Rezin? Rezin is king of Syria. King of Judah, king of Syria. And then he says, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel. So what's happened? Here's the southern kingdom, a little small Judah down there. Here's Israel right above them, and Israel has a king whose name is Pekah. And then there is that Syrian king. They form an alliance to come down and to punish Judah. Actually, not to punish them, but to take their possessions. They've got all of the gold in Solomon's temple. Solomon, one of the richest men on earth, they are a trophy to be had. Little small nation with all of this wealth in it. And so these two kings, Rezin, the king of Judah, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up to Jerusalem to make war against it, but could not prevail against it. And so they've got this alliance. And what happens is, and we don't really get over into this, that what happened was that down here this southern king says, what am I going to do? He said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go over here and ask Assyria to help me. Well, how are you going to create goodwill over, how on earth are you going to get the Assyrians to get involved in this? How about gold? Where are you going to get the gold? Solomon's temple was overlaid with gold. And so you've got all the wealth of Solomon down there, and you've got this king, and his name is Ahaz. They've come down against him. The reality is, though he sought help from Assyria, the one place he did not seek help was from God. So look at it. It was told to the house of David. Who's this? What's the house of David, the family of David? Who was it told to? David's been dead 100, nearly 100 years anyway. It was told to the king, the house of David. It was told to Ahab, Syria's force are deployed in Ephraim. Ephraim is another way of referring to that northern kingdom. So his heart and the heart of his people were moved like trees in the woods are moved by the wind. They're scared to death. Why? Because now Syria is attacking the northern kingdom, and when he takes the northern kingdom, guess who's next? You are in unbelievable trouble. You've got this northern kingdom that really, really hates you. And above that, you've got Syria that really hates you, and both of them are threatening. In fact, I said there was almost civil war. About the second or third king, I think the armies did come against each other. And so there's always, for all of this time, from the time that kingdom was established to the time of Isaiah, from the time of the division to the time of Isaiah, 200 years, there's constant conflict between that northern kingdom and that southern kingdom. And the king looks up there and he said, there is no help for me to find. And so what he does not seek help from God. Verse 3. The Lord said to Isaiah, go out now to meet Ahaz. Who's that? Southern king. Go to Ahaz, you and Shear-Jashub, your son, at the end of the aqueduct from the upper pool. Tell him exactly where you're going to meet him. On the highway to the fuller's field. And so he says, that is exactly where you need to go. Why do I not have verse 4 and 5 here? I'll have to pick up my Bible. Some way my slide here just did not pop up here in my notes and everything. And so Isaiah does what God told him to do. He goes to that place, and when he arrives at that place, King Ahaz is there. And it may be the reason I left out those two verses that immediately follow. Says in verse 4, here's Isaiah's message. Verse 4, you go see Ahaz, and you tell Ahaz, take heed and be quiet. I know you can't say this in America now because it's rude to say this word, but your mama said it to you a lot of times. Shut up. Ahaz, be quiet. Listen. Do not be afraid or be faint-hearted, for these two, which two? Reason and Pekah, these two stubs of a smoking firebrands. Well, I don't know what's that. We'll come back to that in a minute. For the fierce anger of Rezin and Syria and the son of Remaliah, because Syria, Ephraim, and the son of Remaliah have plotted evil against you, saying, let us go against Judah and trouble it, and let us make a gap in the wall for our side and set a king over them. And then the Lord has his answer. What is a firebrand? If I tell you Samson and firebrands, what do you think of? You know the story of Samson? He promised, and he was real strong at everything. And he had this riddle that he gave to the Philistines. I don't know if you remember it or not. And they went and got Samson's wife or girlfriend. I guess it was his wife. Delilah was his girlfriend, but got Samson's wife to tell Samson what the meaning of the riddle was. And so Samson had said, "If you can solve this riddle, I'll give you 70 changes of garment." And it's interesting, all of the things that transpired in relationship to that. But there is that incident. I'm not sure if it's this one or not. When Samson catches, was it 200 foxes, tied their tails together and put firebrands between their tails. You know what a firebrand is? Did you ever have a campfire and take out a piece of wood that was a torch? That's what a firebrand is. You take that thing out, man, and that thing is burning. You got the easy handle down here, and you start running around with it and having all kinds of. That's what a firebrand is. That's what he tied between the foxes that ran between the fields of the Philistines and set their wheat fields on fire. But he says they're not a firebrand. Guess what happens to that firebrand after you play with it for a while? Goes out. What do you got? The stub. Ahab, you're looking like Rezin and Pekah are firebrands that are about to come down and torch Jerusalem. Be quiet. Listen. All they are is a stub. And so he says in verse 7, "Thus says the Lord, it shall not stand nor come to pass." This very thing that you are so afraid of, shut up and listen. You don't have anything at all to be afraid of. Even though you haven't looked in the right place, even though you're trying to make the alliances in the other places, you just be quiet. God has a message for you. And then he says, "For the head of Syria is Damascus," capital city. And so think Damascus, Syria. "And the head of Damascus is Rezin," that's the king. So three names associated with Damascus, or pardon me, with Syria, is Syria, Damascus, and Rezin. And then he says, "Within 65 years, Ephraim will be broken so that it will not be a people." Who's Ephraim? Here's that northern kingdom, the biggest tribe of this 90% up there, the biggest tribe. One of the biggest tribes, not the biggest, was Ephraim. And Ephraim became the dominant tribe. And the message from God is, Ahab, you don't have to worry. You don't have to worry about these firebrands. They're not firebrands, they're stubs. And in 65 years, this northern kingdom will be in 65 years, this northern kingdom will not exist. Just in passing, guess how many years it was from the time Ahab started reigning in the southern kingdom until that northern kingdom fell? 65 years. And so he says to Ahaz that that's what's going to happen. He says in verse 9, "The head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is Remaliah's son," that's Pekah. "If you will not believe, surely you shall not be established." You need to trust in God. You need to believe in God. And if you don't believe what God is saying, if you keep doing all of the things that going down the road that you're going down, you want to quickly look over in 2 Chronicles chapter 28. We really ought not to chase this rabbit, but let me just read you the divine record about Ahab Ahaz and everything that Ahaz was when he became king. Look at chapter 28, 2 Chronicles chapter 28, verse 1. "Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king. and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem, and he did not do what was right in the sight of the Lord as his father David has done. For he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel. There never was a godly king up in this northern kingdom, and here's this southern kingdom that has some godly kings, a few godly kings. Well, obviously the first one was David, but he says he didn't do that. He walked in the ways of the kings in the northern kingdom, the kings of Israel, and made molded images for the Baals. He burned incense in the valley of the sons of Hinnom and burned his children in fire, according to the abominations of the nations whom the Lord had cast out before the children of Israel. How'd they burn he offered his own children in human sacrifice at a place called Hinnom, the valley of Hinnom. The Hebrew way of saying valley of Hinnom is Gehenna. You know the Greek word for eternal fire of hell? Gehenna. This place ultimately became the place of refuge for the entire city. It was a city dump, and there was always fire burning out of there. And when Jesus was trying to get people in his day to know what is going to happen to you, he uses the word Gehenna, but he said, I'm not talking about that Gehenna. When it rains out there, the fire is quenched. Whenever all the garbage is burned, the fire burns out. I'm going to tell you, if you don't obey God, there is an eternal Gehenna where the worm does not die and where the fire is unquenchable. And if you'd been a Jew and you'd heard about an eternal Gehenna, you wouldn't have thought about the city dump. You would have thought about, all of those things that transpired. And he sacrificed and burned incense on the high places and on the hills and under every green tree. Don't have time to continue that, but the rest of that chapter is amazingly interesting, and I thought if I had more time, I'd look at the rest of that. Let's get back to the problem, though. Go back to Isaiah chapter 7, and he says, verse 10, Moreover, the Lord spoke again to Ahaz, saying, Ask for a sign. If you want to understand whether you have to worry about Syria or whether you have to worry about Assyria, they're nothing. They look like a torch that's ready to burn Israel to death. They are nothing but stubs. And if you don't believe that, ask for a sign from the Lord. A sign in the depths or in the heavens above. You pick it. If you want God to manifest the truthfulness of this, then you pick it. And the amazing thing is, King Ahaz says, I will not ask for a sign. Now, shall I present the problem before I present the solution? Why this passage is one of the most difficult passages to understand. But I believe you'll walk out of here tonight understanding one of the most difficult passages in all of the Bible. Let me present the problem. The Lord is going to give you a sign. Verse 13, Hear now, O house of David, is it a small thing for you to weary men, but will you also weary God? Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, a virgin will conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. There is no question who that's talking about. There is no question who this is talking about. Here is a promise that from a virgin will come a son who is God in the flesh. We got that. And verse 15 says, curds and honey he shall eat, that he may know to refuse the evil and choose the good. No problem there. You read verse 15 and you read that, the son's going to be born and he's going to make choices and he's going to make good choices. And then he says, for before the child shall know to refuse evil and good, the land that you dread will be forsaken by both of her kings. You see the problem? Jesus is not due to be born for another 750 years. And the Lord is going to give you a sign. It's going to be a virgin birth. And before the child is old enough to know right from wrong, these kings will both perish. You see the problem? These kings are reigning. It's 700 years before the virgin conceives. How on earth is it possible that before the son that is born, how on earth is it possible that both of these kings were going to perish before the child, having been born, is able to choose evil and good? And those who want to mock the Bible have a field day with this. If you don't believe Jesus is going to be born of a virgin, what do? Isaiah 7:14, they say, and I'm talking about theologians, is not a prophecy about Jesus. It has to do with a young woman in Isaiah's day. And so King Ahaz, there is a young woman here, and you got to redefine virgin to get a young woman out of this. I mean, and some modern speech translations, by the way, check the Bible translation you've got, may not even have a virgin shall conceive. I don't know if anybody's translation has that here or not, but there are individuals who've looked at this and they said, oh, it's not a virgin. It's just some woman's going to have a child out of here. Before this child is able to know good from evil, these kings are going to be out of the way. That is all there is in Isaiah 14. And so if you make the child be born of a young woman in the days of Isaiah, you don't have any problem with this text at all. Guess what problem you have? The Holy Spirit of God says the virgin is Mary. Well, how can the birth of Jesus 700 years later be a sign to Ahaz? Ahaz been dead 700 years. How on earth could that be a sign? And people look at this and say, you can't trust the Bible. And that is why this is one of the most difficult passages in the Bible. Because this virgin had to be somebody that was in Ahaz's day. But you know that's wrong. You know who the virgin is. Matthew chapter 1 says this very prophecy has to do with the prophecy about the birth of Jesus. What is the solution to this problem? You understand the problem? What's the solution? Well, on the screen, if you'll look at the screen, if I had the slides, I would say, here is the solution. How many children are mentioned in Isaiah 7? It's amazing. If I had the slides, I would show you another child in Isaiah 7. I read it to you just a few minutes ago. There is another child in Isaiah chapter 7, other than Jesus. Look what the Lord says. Isaiah chapter 7, verse 3. The Lord says to Isaiah, "Go out now to meet Ahaz, you and your son, Shear-Jashub." Isaiah, when you meet the king, you've got your son standing beside you. Now go back and look at what is said. The promise of the virgin birth in verse 14 was not assigned to Ahaz. We read verse 14 as though the Lord Ahaz is going to give you a sign. To whom is the sign given in verse 14? It's to the house of David. When Ahaz is dead, the house of David, the lineage of David will continue on. Furthermore, the word you. Therefore, the Lord himself shall give you a sign. The word you is plural. Can I talk Southern? Ask for a sign, Ahaz. I don't want a sign. The Lord is, O house of David, family of David. The Lord is going to give the family of David. Ask for a sign. Ahaz says, I do not want one. And so Isaiah says, therefore the Lord himself will give you all a sign. Y'all. Who is the y'all of verse 14? It's not Ahaz. The sign wasn't given to Ahaz. It was given to y'all. Who's the y'all? It's the house of David. Ahaz didn't want a son, had no use for God, didn't believe in God, didn't believe in the prophecy, didn't even want a sign he'd already convinced that it's impossible for it to happen, already made an alliance with Assyria, already to give up the gold of the temple and everything. And he said, ask for a sign. And Ahaz says, I don't want a sign. But the Lord is therefore to the house of David. The Lord is going to give y'all a sign. What is the sign to y'all? You all. It's the virgin birth. And so the house of David was given the sign that they would see the virgin birth as a sign from the Lord. Well, wait a minute. What about verse 16? Before the child is able to choose good and bad. How do you reconcile that? Who is standing beside Isaiah? A child. O house of David, the Lord will give you all a sign. And then he says, but before the child, this child, not that child born of a virgin, but before Shear-Jashub. The Lord didn't say, go meet King Ahaz. Isn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing what's in the text if you just look at every word? Who was there? Who was standing there? the child, the son of Ahaz was, the son of Isaiah was, and Isaiah said, O house of David, the Lord is going to give you a sign. And he says, before the child, not capital C as in the New King James, before this child is able to choose the good and know the evil, these two kings are going to be destroyed. The child of verse 16 fits in that 65-year period. And we need to understand that. Look in chapter 8 and verse 18. Isaiah starts in verse 16, says, bind up the testimony, seal the law among my disciples, and I will wait on the Lord. The Lord who hides his face from the house of Jacob, and I will hope in him, in that Lord. Isaiah, who when he was called says, here am I, send me. Now Isaiah says, here am I, and the children whom the Lord has given me, we are for signs. My children are a sign. And you go back to chapter 7 and verse 16, this child was the sign that it was going to happen in that time, before the child. And that's the only way you reconcile this. But it is a perfect reconciliation. All you got to do is just to look at what Isaiah said, and since he was saying before the child shall, he's not talking about the child that's going to be born of a virgin, but before this child, Shear-Jashub, before he's able to know good, right from wrong, these kings are going to be destroyed. And when in the next chapter he says, this son is being used by God to teach a lesson to the people, he is a sign from God. Not the sign of 7:14. 7:14, a virgin shall conceive. That's Jesus. But he stood as a sign to those people that before he reached maturity, they would not have to worry about all of these kings. I know that's heavy, and I know you've got to really sit down and study it through, but once you understand, take your child with you. Why? Because he's got to be there for you to accomplish this. And so when he says, before the child is able to know good from evil, these kings won't even bother you. I hope that makes sense. Stephen, you had a comment.
Yeah, it goes back to my,
Speak loud so I'll be able to hear you.
it goes back to my simplistic way. I always read that he will be called Emmanuel. Emmanuel means God with us.
Yes.
The boy God, he knew right from wrong right then, the time Jesus knew right from wrong right then when Isaiah is being spoken about here. So I always saw where it says he called him Emmanuel. Why are they going to say his name's Emmanuel? By saying he is God. And God knows right from wrong. In the form of Jesus, he knows him. So when that child is born, even before that occurs, even right now, God, Jesus, knew right from wrong. So I always keyed off the word Emmanuel. So everything you just went through real heavy, for me, I just went, hey, we're talking about God. God knows right from wrong.
Yes, but Emmanuel did not. Jesus was tempted in all points like as we are, and Jesus had to make a choice about right and wrong. Verse 15 is a transitional verse. There's no question about it. That's the bill. We'll talk about this some more next week if you like. I'm not through with Ahaz. We got to look at what he did in relationship. And I know we're in some heavy stuff, but just think about what I said and look at that. The sign of the virgin birth was not a sign to Ahaz. Verse 14 does not say, "Oh, Ahaz, here's you a sign." Here's a sign for the house of David, because it is for y'all. You all. That's it.